Larry has been patiently waiting by. So, Larry, we really appreciate your time. Well, I know that you're retired. I know your time is precious. So we appreciate you hanging in. I can't wait to jump in with you. I think this is so cool because I used to read your column in the paper and loved it all those years I read it. So you've actually got our history nugget this week. So we're going to just jump right in. Is that all right?
Yeah. Go ahead.
All right. So
Okay.
can you tell us a little bit more about why the buildings are set so far back from the street on one particular side of Main Street in Ephrata?
That's one of the quirks of Ephrata. You go into town, you find all the buildings on the north side. They're right up against the sidewalk. If you cross the street to the south side, you get the sidewalk. Then you've got a 25-foot setback, whole first of East Main Street. All the businesses, all the stores, and that's because back in the late 1800s, there were two very posh hotels in town. There was the Mount Vernon, which is in the square where there's an office building there now. It used to be the Lancaster County Weeklies, but now it's not. But anyway, and up on the hill where the Hampton Inn is now, used to be the other hotel, which was the Spring. And these were very, very, like I said, the Spring was a spa and attracted people from all over the East Coast. And they'd have passengers coming in on the trains. The train stop was at the Mount Vernon Hotel down at the square. So that's, you got it right there. The Mount Vernon and the Mountain Springs had an arrangement. When passengers got off the train to go to the Mountain Springs, the Mount Vernon would signal to send it with flags or whatever to the Mountain Springs, and they would send their gun to pick up the passengers and ferry them back to the hotel. So to accommodate that little thing, all the buildings in the south side had to be set back so the two hotels had direct line of sight. If they couldn't see each other, they couldn't signal. So, and that to this day, anything that's built in that first block has to go by that setback.
That's cool. That's one of those things you'd never know.
Unless you have Lancaster Connects and you bring Larry Alexander on, and now you're educated.
I probably lived in this town 30 years before I knew that. So anyway.
Oh, wow.
There you have it.
Yeah, one of the other little quirks about Ephrata is how you say Ephrata, right?
Yeah.
It's like one of those names of a town that...
I've had people ask me where Ephrata is, Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, Larry, with Memorial Day, a lot of folks sadly miss the intention of what's coming up here this weekend. Memorial Day is about honoring those who made the ultimate sacrifice, gave their life in service to our country. That's really what it's about. We kick this show off. Trust me, I would love if we could just really get down to helping people wake up happy and sleep better here and skip all the hoopla of sales and discounts and everything. But, consumers have an itch to scratch with that, so we participate. But I'm far happier to participate this weekend, this year, this Memorial Day with you, with Anne-Marie on the show. So your first book you wrote, which probably is new news for our listeners, was about Band of Brothers. Biggest Brother, the life of Major Dick Winters, the man who led the Band of Brothers. So tell us about your connection there, especially for our younger audience members, or maybe even those that just aren't in the know. Tell us all about Dick Winters and the Band of Brothers from your perspective.
Well, Dick Winters was actually born in Lancaster in 1918. Lived his first 2 years in New Holland before his family moved to Ephrata, which is where he's from. He has a lot of his family had his grandfather and his great uncle owned hotels in Lancaster at one point, in Ephrata at one point. So they were kind of big social circles. It's his hometown. He lived there for 10 years before moving to Lancaster. Anyway, Dick Winters went on to join the Army after graduating from F&M in 1941, and then the war came along, and he enlisted as a private. But before the war ended, he'd be a major and a battalion commander. So he was a very competent person, very very patriotic person, very determined. His men loved him. He led them and never put them at any undue risk if he could help it. He was just an excellent officer, an excellent leader, and I met him in 2001. Back in the 1990s, author Stephen Ambrose, who's a Pulitzer Prize-winning author, picked up on the story of Easy Company. That's his originally. They the story of Easy Company. Easy Company was kind of a member of the entire war in Europe. They jumped into France on D-Day. That's his home in Ephrata, where he lived in Ephrata. They jumped in that, and they fought in France. They fought in Belgium, the Battle of the Bulge. They fought in Holland. And when the war ended, they were on Adolf Hitler's balcony at Berchtesgaden in the Bavarian Alps, and that's Dick right there and his cousins. So Ambrose picked up on the story and decided to write a book about it called Band of Brothers. The book was picked up by Steven Spielberg, Tom Hanks, who pooled their resources to create a 10-part miniseries. That's Winter's Home in Lancaster, a 10-part miniseries called Band of Brothers, based on the book, and that went global. That went viral. They would guess. Suddenly they were media idol. You got Dick coming up from all over, people showing up at his door just to meet him. He speaking engagements and just became a national, a worldwide celebrity. And that's how I met him in 2001. The miniseries was being aired by HBO, and my boss in the newspaper said maybe I should contact Dick because people and talk to this guy. So I tracked him down, and I went and I interviewed him, and it found out that when I found out together that our homes were about 150 yards from each other. We both grew up in on East Fulton Street, and we both knew the same people. I mean, I knew his aunt Lottie. When I was a kid, we used to rake leaves for her, and we used to shovel snow, and we used to do things like that. So I knew her, and Dick and I became friends, and that's how the book came about. About 2 years after I met him, my boss again said, "You should write a book about us. People should know who this guy is," and there's a lot of interest there. And he was right. The miniseries was like a media phenomenon, and Dick agreed. Dick agreed to sit down with me and do interviews, and we put that book together back in 2004.
I actually on Band of Brothers,
the 101st Airborne, not 82nd. Winters was
right,
101st
okay.
Airborne.
Right, my bad. Yeah, my bad there.
That's okay.
I actually put the Band of Brothers DVD set in my box to take up to the campsite. When I say camp, I use that word loosely. It's more like glamour camping, glamping. So we have a TV and a DVD player in the camper, and once it gets to the end of the day and you're kind of worn out and tired, I'll put on Band of Brothers this weekend coming up. But you,
the book is. The thing about the book is, I got the guy who, Damian Lewis, actually wrote a foreword for me for the book as to what it was like to play Winters, to meet Winters, and try to be him in the movie. It's kind of interesting insight.
Yeah, that really is. That really is. It was fortunate he was able to represent him well, having been able to connect with him. You actually went with some of Easy Company over to Europe when you wrote the book about that. The book was called In the Footsteps of the Band of Brothers, A Return to Easy Company's Battlefields with Sergeant Forrest Guth. Did I say that right?
Right.
Sergeant's last name there?
Right.
Guth? Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So, we'll have some pictures scrolling on the screen. So that's from when you were over in Europe.
That's where Winters landed on D-Day morning. Good. But this is, of course, the church in St. Mary Glees. That's where about the book. Okay. A couple of years later,
run us through your tour there in Europe with the members of Easy Company.
Okay, I just had this urge after I wrote the book. I had this urge to go see these, and Forrest Guth, I'd gotten to know Forrest. He's a Millersville College graduate, and he came back from the war. He went to Millersville, what was then called Millersville Normal School, and to learn how to be. He was a graphic teacher, and so, and I met him when I worked for Millersville magazine, and that's when I met Forrest, and then became friends with him also. And then when the opportunity for this book came up, I talked to my publishers into helping to fund this trip because it would have been costly otherwise. But so they agreed to fund the trip. So I took a veteran along with me, and Forrest was the one I picked because Winters at this point was not going to go along anymore. He was at an age, and his health was at such a point where he wasn't about to go along over there. So he right away. His wife a few months earlier. I figured this to get his mind off his grief. We went back, and this is the field here back on D-Day morning. Easy Company's commander was killed in a plane crash when his plane was shot down. He crashed in that field, and then Winters became the head of Easy Company by default because that's where the plane crashed. And even though Winters didn't know it until about several days later, he was now in command of Easy Company because his captain was killed in this plane crash. But anyways, I went over there. We left on the 31st of October 2008. And we 13 days walking the battlefields. We went to Aldbourne, England, where they trained. Then we went over by ferry to Normandy, and we went to Carentan, which is this is Carentan. This is the street they charged down when they were taking the town of Carentan. They charged down this street. They attacked down this road, and we went to Carentan. I went to Ypres, which is they returned to England from after their nearly a month on the front lines in France. But we tried to cover everything. We covered Bastogne to the Battle of the Bulge. We covered Holland, where they jumped into in September for Operation Market Garden. And I tried to hit as many places as I could in the time I had allotted to me to try to recapture and take then and now pictures. This is the aid station where Winters was treated when he was nicked by a ricocheted bullet. It's the aid station. Try to hit these places and try to match up then and now because I'm kind of a nut about then and now photographs. This is also in they had charged across this square. They were taking the center of the city, the center of the town. They charged across the street. This is the main plaza in Carentan. This is actually where Winters was nicked by a ricocheted bullet. That occurred in this square, and that's a photo of the square. But so that's an interesting trip. We didn't get into Germany, but actually they didn't fight in Germany. I was covering their battlefields, and technically they did not fight any battles in Germany. I wanted to go to Berchtesgaden, but unfortunately we left too late to make it there before it was closed due to snow. But I had guides along the way who were very knowledgeable. I had a guide in England. I had a guide in Europe. This is the city in Holland where the 101st Air took on Operation Market Garden in September of '44. And again, that's the same street today.
I just love the fact
like I
that
said,
you have such a passion for this, bringing forth, the history to modern day with the then and now photos, obviously telling the story. You had the opportunity to know Dick in a way that not many people outside of his immediate family would have known him. But you were able to be with him when he returned to his former high school to talk to the kids. That was probably pretty interesting. Can you share anything about that experience?
Yeah, but he came back to Lancaster. He was going to McCaskey High School. Now, he didn't graduate from McCaskey. He graduated from what was called Boys High School. He was the last class to graduate from Boys High School. The following year is when McCaskey opened. Still, he was considered a graduate of that school, so they brought him back in, I'm going to say 2005, probably, on an alumni award. And after the award, he went into a classroom of seniors and talked about World War II, and he asked for questions, and they didn't know. Only about two of them really had any idea what happened. And they for seniors in high school, they knew surprisingly little about the history of World War II. And to Winters, considering all the sacrifice he'd seen and of men killed and maimed and things like that, that really got him. And he creamed them out right there in the classroom for not knowing their history. I mean, that's one thing he liked. I mean, he liked people who knew what was going on. He wouldn't interview with me unless I'd read the book Band of Brothers. When I called, I reached him through one of his men, Wild Bill Garnier. And Wild Bill told me, don't call him. If you haven't read the book, don't call him. He won't talk to you. Well, I had read the book. But so Dick was very outgoing for me. Wild Bill used more colorful. If you've seen the miniseries, that guy, the guy who played him in the miniseries, had him down pat. He liked the salty language, but he told me that Winters. He turned down TV interviews because the person interviewing him had no idea about what happened. You know, he was very much a stickler for not only what his men and him, but all veterans. He was always about the veterans. He was always about, he would say, like, we didn't do anything special. You know, we just did what we were sent. Everybody else did what they were sent to do. So, he said, the fact that they were singled out in this book was, to him he liked it because he could bring their story out, but he could also highlight the story of every veteran and what they all went through. And so he was, he liked the attention, yet he didn't really want it focused on Easy Company. Does that make any sense?
Yeah. To me, it makes perfect sense. I mean, for somebody, we live in today's modern age in such a level of comfort and ease. I mean, truly. People feel their inconvenience when their Gmail goes down or when Facebook won't allow them to go live. They think that's an inconvenience in their day.
Can you imagine living in this woods like they did in December of 1944? Those are their... And they lived out there in sub-zero weather and snow. So, yeah, the inconvenience of having your internet go down is kind of petty compared to what these guys put up with.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, I can certainly appreciate and respect completely where Dick was coming from. Of, this isn't about me. It's about service. It's about the group. It's about the totality of service members. And having lived, and I can't imagine having lived and seen that level of sacrifice, human sacrifice, people paying the ultimate price. I mean, it certainly changes your perspective of the people you meet in the entire world, I'm sure.
That was the toughest.
The producers tell me that
part of watching them. That was the toughest part of watching the miniseries for him, knowing who was going to get hit when. That was the toughest part of watching the miniseries.
Yeah, I'm sure. Another fact about Dick that maybe some don't know is he was very vocal in the support of minorities who serve. Do you ever have any conversations with him about that?
Not a whole lot, but he would, because he felt didn't matter who you were. You served your country. You did what you were sent to do, and you put your life on the line. And whether you were white or black or Native American, it didn't really matter to him. The veterans are what it was all about.
Yeah.
Something else you talked with our producers about was German U-boats. They made it to the East Coast during World War II, and something about the city of Miami in Florida. What's the story there?
Well, early in the war, during what German submariners called the Happy Days, they patrolled the Atlantic Ocean. They were operating easily within sight of ships. They'd sit out there, especially at nighttime. They'd sit in the water and watch for cargo vessels going up and down the East Coast, because they would be silhouetted by the lights of cities like Miami and places like that. They refused to dim their lights because of their tourist trade, because of their they just refused to dim the lights. And there are photographs you can get of ships burning just off the coast, and that was it was dangerous, especially at night, because, like I said, they'd silhouette against the light from on shore. So there were you can find a number of U-boat wrecks off the East Coast from subs being sunk by the Navy.
Yeah. Larry, real quick, we're kind of going a little off script, if you will.
When do we stay on script?
Yeah, we don't. Our production team in the background is rolling their eyes right now. But I think it's very topical. And I've alluded to it now twice. We'll go for a third time. The consumerism around Memorial Day weekend. I think we should definitely take the opportunity to really cement and remind people what this weekend is about. It is about the memory the sacrifice of those who have died. It's become commonplace to say Happy Memorial Day, have a great Memorial Day. How did Dick greet that? I would wonder if you could speak to that. Does saying have a wonderful Memorial Day weekend, does that kind of cut like a knife for people that have served and seen their fellow brothers and sisters, killed in the line of duty?
No, so I did. We didn't talk about that, but knowing Dick as I did, I'd say yeah. He'd be all the groups that put flags and areas. Like I'm going to be at two different ceremonies this weekend where the flags would be placed at all the graves, and that's what he would be doing. He'd be out there with that. He wouldn't be hyping for sales and long weekend vacations and things like that. All the like you call it the consumerism and the vacation type atmosphere. Some people see it as it's a 3-day weekend. It's more than a 3-day weekend, especially if you gave the ultimate spice in life. It's a 3-day weekend, and I think a lot of people lose the meaning of that. They really do lose the meaning of it. I think I said I'm going to be going to 2 ceremonies this weekend, and there'll be a number of people there, but I'll bet there'll be a lot of people there who don't have any idea, like in New Holland and Effort, who have no idea that these things are going on in the cemeteries. That there's groups out there honoring the veterans who actually fell for our country. There are people who won't even go on. So
yeah, we're actually going to share some of those ceremonies and events in our community segment just after we wrap up with you, Larry. Talking about you, Larry, personally, you have some interesting things that you participate in. Civil War reenactments, according to Wikipedia, only Wikipedia guest, and apparently you've also been involved in a couple of movies. Tell us a little bit about those.
Back in the 80s, my wife suggested I get a hobby. She stamp collecting or coin collecting, something like that. But being a history buff, I joined the Civil War reenactment group and ended up wearing woolen jackets, woolen pants, and all that stuff in July and August, which my wife thought was absolutely crazy, and which I would have to agree. But because of that, and it's cool. I mean, being a history buff, it was one way of looking into history. When you're in the camps at night, and there's period music sounding in the camps, you're sitting around a fire, and you hear fiddler playing a tune or something like that. You can go back in time. You can go back, and it's kind of interesting. And because of that, of course, in 1992, they took the book Killer Angels by Shara, and they made it into a movie called Gettysburg that Ted Turner financed. And thousands of us went part in making of the movie with Sheen as Robert E. Lee and Jeff Daniels as Colonel Chamberlain, Joshua Chamberlain. So and it was kind of cool seeing how movies come together. And they're far different when you're making them than they are on the screen, because when you're making them, they're boring as all get out because there's so much lag time between scenes. When they put it all together, it's quite exciting on the screen. So it was kind of neat seeing seeing how it all came together. And the director was a very much for details. Ron Maxwell would he actually asked us, "Is this the way it was done?" And we'd say, yeah, that's right, or no, they do it this way, and he would change it because he wanted it accurate. So it was kind of neat in that respect. Some directors don't care, they have their own ideas and they won't change their minds. But he was very pliable about that. And then, of course, a few years later, did the second by Michael Shara called Gods and Generals. It wasn't quite as successful as Getty. It was along the same lines. So. Yeah, I got the chance to do that a little bit too, so that was neat. And I got to meet so many. And the other thing is, I got to meet so many. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, very interesting that you've been able to, parlay your hobbies into something more substantive, like adding to our culture through these movies that remind us of the past. That's really great.
Well, yeah, it was fun. It was interesting too. And it's a kind of opportunity. My daughter got into it too, but my wife never did. But my daughter likes to put on the hoop skirts and all that stuff.
That's cool.
Neat. So again, off script here. One other thing, we're really big. You probably heard it as you stood by through Anne Marie's segment with Building Bridges. we challenge people to connect with our guests. So whether that's donating or volunteering time, through my work with Cub Scouts in the past, we've donated to Wreaths Across America. You're involved in community ceremonies. Would it be okay? I'm assuming it wouldn't be frowned upon, and I'm going to challenge our listeners and our watchers this weekend. Carve out an hour of time to go to your local hardware store, like your locally owned Ace, buy half a dozen to a dozen flags, or maybe some potted flowers or flowers you could lay on a grave, and you'll be able to tell the headstones of which service members should be honored this weekend. Would that be out of bounds, Larry, if somebody were to do that on their own?
No, I don't think so.
If they just don't know where to connect.
I think, yeah, you said go to any cemetery. You can tell the veterans' graves. I'll have flags. Most of they get new flags at Memorial Day. Usually the American Legion, VFW, clubs like to come out and they decorate graves of veterans, flag holders, and all, nearly all things. Sometimes they're not, but you can easily buy the graves and put some flowers down. And spread them out. I mean, one of the big things about Dick Winters is the cemetery where he's buried. There are over 200 veterans' graves there, dating back to as far as the Revolutionary War, and they each get one flag at their. Dick Winters, unfortunately, is his grave's become kind of a shrine. Yeah, there's anywhere from 6 flags there at any one time, plus mementos laid on the headstone, in airborne badges, coins, military emblems, things like that laid on the headstone. And I understand the people wanting to do that, paying homage to Dick. But Dick would say, hey, there's another veteran 2 rows away from me. There's another veteran right across the driveway from me. Spread them out a little bit, and that his family did not want. In my books, you'll never find a reference as to where the family plot is. That came out. It got out, even though I was asked not to reveal it. It did get out, but I did not reveal where his gravesite. And now it's common knowledge now, but Dick didn't. The family didn't want it to become a shrine, and I don't know if Dick would say spread it out. Yeah, flowers, flags, whatever you want to put out. Any way you want to honor a veteran, I think Winters would smile down on.
Yeah, and I'll say, again, maybe affording some flags and flowers isn't in your wheelhouse this week. Maybe it just isn't doable. Here's an idea: go next week, middle of the week, next weekend, after the holiday. Maybe a flag has fallen over. That's one thing that I just can't tolerate.
Flag gets broken too. Wind sometimes enough wind sometimes snaps those little that they come on.
Yep. So maybe grab if you find one that's in disrepair, it should be disposed of properly. You can Google that, search that, how to do that. But half an hour. I mean, in your community, just take a quick stroll. You're outside getting some fresh air. That's another way to help our community. And again, I really challenge our listeners and our watchers to participate in the community that way after watching episodes like this.
Another thing that people have, an effort we have the Winters Leadership Plaza. It's right along the walking trail, which is the old rail line, and it's now called the Major Dick Winters Memorial Walking Trail. Right there by Fulton Street, there's a plaza. There are bricks in the sidewalk, with veterans have purchased with their veterans' names on them, and there's several hundred of these bricks there. And in the center of the plaza, as a statue depicts Dick Winters. It's a duplicate of one that was erected in Sainte Marie du Mont in Normandy a few years back. It's a leadership statue that Dick okayed. Her name doesn't appear on it, which it doesn't, except as an above his pocket here, where his name would be on his. But the people lay flowers there too. People can put flags in the garden area around the plaza too. And because every year on Veterans Day in November, they line that trail with candles. Light it up every year. That's the plaza. That's the statue. But yeah, they take that trail and they actually put illuminaries along the length of that trail with emblems of veterans on them. So that's another way to honor that. Ephrata honors its favorite son,
Yeah.
all of its favorite
Well,
sons
that's
and
great.
daughters.
Yeah. Well, Larry, I really appreciate you spending the time with us. We do have a
appreciate being
question.
here.
And of course, remember, this show is also available as a podcast. You can find all the links at lancasterconnects.com. Don't forget to like and share this video on Facebook and other social media platforms. Leave a comment, tell us how we're doing, give us feedback about the show. Again, that's lancasterconnects.com.